Well, good morning. Welcome to Maker's Church, you who are not children, who are still here. Big children, that's right, Chris. Big kids. It's weird to me how much we place our trust in people and things all the time. Sometimes we're aware of it, sometimes we have no clue what's happening. I mean, most of you probably drove here. I drove here this morning. We place a lot of trust in our vehicle, that it works, that it doesn't crash, in the other drivers on the road. I don't know about you, but I fly a lot. That's a lot of trust we place in flying vehicles in the air. I've been on probably 100 airplanes. Still blows my mind every time. How does this thing stay up? And I get a little bit of anxiety whenever we land. I don't know about you. We trust the food that's prepared for us. We're not always sure, is it safe or not? There's all these different things. I had an experience 2 weeks ago. I was visiting my brother in Tahoe, and my wife and I went up, and we had a great time in Tahoe. We jumped in the lake. We hung out at a house. We hit up Mammoth on the way down. It was gorgeous. It was beautiful. Sorry, this mic's about to feedback. Can you pull the gain down? I can hear it. Well, can you pull the gain down here? It's going to feedback, I can tell. Thank you so much. Little house business there. So we had this amazing time, thank you, that's so much better, up in Tahoe, Mammoth. We were coming down on the 395. It's my favorite highway to drive. It feels like you're on the surface of the moon with the desert and the hills and the trees. It's otherworldly and beautiful. And we came to this little town. I don't remember the name. I won't throw shade on it. Gas was like $7.60. It was nuts. Like, we can never afford to come back to this place, so they can charge whatever they want. We can't ever return. And there was this gas station that had an ice cream milkshake machine, and it looked so fancy and high-tech, and my wife was like, oh, they have these things in Japan. I'm like, oh, we were going to go to Japan 2 years ago, and COVID ruined it, so this is like the next best thing, right? A gas station ice cream milkshake. And it had this LED screen, and you pick this cup, and you pick the flavor, and you put it in, and it brings the cup up into the machine so you can't see what's happening. Like, you don't know what's going on in there. And then 30 seconds later, there's this song, there's this little guy on the screen who's dancing around. This milkshake descends from the heavens. And it was delicious. And my wife the whole time was like, are you sure you want to get a milkshake, a dairy product from the middle of nowhere town? I'm like, heck yeah, I do. Do you know me? So I get this milkshake. Long story short, it was great. That's the end of the story. Actually, the next day, I had the worst food poisoning for like 2 days straight. It just destroyed me. I was wrecked. I placed my trust in this weird gas station milkshake, which was a terrible idea. I say all that to illustrate, we all sometimes place our trust in things that let us down, that disappoint us, that fail us. And so we're going to talk a lot about trust today in the context of this James series we've been in. And hopefully I haven't ruined your trust in me by telling you my bad decision-making when it comes to milkshakes. Other than that, my life decision-making is pretty good. But we're in this context of this series called Brother to Brother, where we're exploring the book of James, which was written by the literal younger brother of Jesus. He was a man who grew up with Jesus Christ, saw him as a child, the ins, the outs, the good, the bad, the ugly. He saw behind the curtain and still chose to follow Jesus as his Lord and Savior. And he writes this incredibly practical book. As you've seen, if you've been with us the last few weeks, we've been excavating these truths that are just about the here and now, how to live well in community in this world right here and right now. And last week, Derek kicked it off with the beginning, the first half of chapter 4, where it talks all about this idea of we have these desires, we have these longings, and we have this tension because we don't have what we want. We don't have what we want because we don't ask. Or we ask and we have these bad motives, or we're asking for things that aren't actually going to satisfy what we really need. So it's all around this conversation around what does it look like to be people who ask, who have the boldness and the courage to ask. And so from there, we go into this next part of James, the second half of chapter 4, and I was also tasked with the first part of chapter 5. I'm going to be honest. When I read these, I'm like, I don't really want to talk about these chapters. I'm kind of filling in. I'm like, I don't know if I like these passages. But oftentimes, that means I really need to hear it. And so I hope that is the truth today. That way they might be uncomfortable, I really think deep down there's such encouragement and vibrancy in life in these words. So I'm going to kick it off here. James chapter 4, starting at verse 13. James says this, "Now listen, He gets very spicy. You'll hear that. James is getting real feisty in this chapter. He's like, listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this city or that city, spend a year there, carry on business and make money. We'll sell milkshakes, we'll make a bunch of money. You do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You're a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes, and all such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and don't do it, it is sin for them. Now listen, you rich people. Weep and wail because of the misery that is coming on you. Your wealth has rotted and moths have eaten your clothes. Your gold and your silver have corroded, and their corrosion will testify against you and eat your flesh like fire. That's why we send the kids away. We don't want them hearing all this. It's nightmares, terrifying. I'm going to have nightmares from this. You have hoarded wealth as in the last days. Look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Almighty. You have lived on earth in luxury and self-indulgence. You have fattened yourselves as in the day of slaughter, the day of feasting. You have condemned and murdered the innocent one who was not opposing you. The end. Heavy stuff, right? James is getting into it. This is the most passionate section of this book. He's fiery. You can tell this has touched a nerve for him. There's something personal here in these words. There's this potency with which he speaks. And I'm probably not going to have time to get to the second half of that, chapter 5, so I'm just going to give you some real quick takeaways, and then we'll loop back around, and if I hit it, we'll see. 4 quick takeaways from James chapter 5. God hates greed. And I think he hates it mostly because what it does to us. It destroys us. It corrodes us from the inside out. Those of us who have greed, it is a cancer that eats at our bones, and it destroys our relationships. It destroys our communities. It destroys our churches. It destroys our countries. God hates greed because it damages his children. It's toxic to us. And I cannot escape the words of Jesus Christ himself, who said, you cannot serve both God and money. Because money, your love for money, putting money first in all things, will require you to make sacrifices that will hurt others, that will not be in service to being here for good as God calls us to be. So God's like, you can't serve us both. I invite you to choose. Next point. How we make our money matters, and how we spend our money matters. Lastly, James calls out a truth that I think most of us know or have become more aware of in the last few years. There is absolutely inequality and inequity and oppression and systems and structures that set others up for success at the expense of others, globally and in our country. God detests that. He's a God of justice, a God of fairness, a God who wants us to treat others as we would treat ourselves. And so you see here in James' description of those wealthy, specifically those who are serving money as their God. He's like, the end result is death. Don't choose that. So God hates greed for what it does to us. We cannot serve God and money. How we make our money and how we spend our money matters. And there is inequality and oppression in this world, and we as a church are called to do something about it. We'll get back to it, but James already said in here, hey, if you know what to do and you don't do it, that's a problem. All right. A lot of scriptures. I got some more scriptures for you. I don't think for me it's possible to get the most out of what James is saying here without going a step back, taking a flashback to his big bro Jesus, looking at what he said first. I think we can better understand what James is saying by uncovering what Jesus already said. It sets it up. It gives context. So I'm going to read chapter 12 from the Gospel of Luke. And if you want, you can close your eyes and just let the scriptures wash over you. You can follow along on the screen or your book, however you want. Engage with this moment here. Jesus says, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide his inheritance with me." Oh, you teachers, Bree, Shalice, you probably had that. "Teacher, fix this for me." Literally, that's happening here. I love Jesus' response. He's like, "Man, who appointed me to be judge and arbiter between you two?" He's like, "I don't care about this little thing, but I'm going to teach you something better." He says, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. For life does not consist of possessions alone. Life is not measured by what you own." Then he told them a parable. He said, "A rich man had a fertile farm that produced fine crops. And he said to himself, 'What should I do? I don't have room for all of these crops. I'm doing great.' Then he said, 'I know, I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Then I will have enough room to store all of my wheat and other goods. And I will sit back to myself and say, my friend, you have enough stored away for many years to come. Take it easy, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to him, 'You fool, you will die this very night. Then who will get everything that you worked for? Yes, a person is a fool who stores up earthly wealth, but does not have a rich relationship with God.' And then Jesus continues and says to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life.'" He tells this strong-worded parable to make this point here. Do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, or what you will wear. For life is more than food, and your body more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. As I said before, these lazy birds, they do nothing. They have no storeroom or barn, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds?" I love this part here. "Who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life?" There are other translations that said, "Who by worrying can add a single inch to your height?" I'm like, oh man, when I was in high school playing basketball, all I wanted was to be a couple inches taller. I was like, man, if I could just jump a few inches taller, if I can be a few inches taller, like I'll make it. I'll play college. None of that was true. I could have been 7 feet tall and I would have been terrible. But I just wanted that so bad. I worried about it. I dreamt about it. I'm like, do I buy these stretching things where I hang from the ceiling just to get a few inches of height? And Jesus is like, who by worrying can do that? And if you cannot accomplish a little thing like that, then why worry over the bigger things? Again, consider the flowers that grow. They do not labor or spin, yet I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If that has how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and gone tomorrow and thrown in the fire, how much more will he clothe you? But you have little faith. Do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink, and do not worry about it. For the pagan world runs after these things, and your Father knows you need them. But seek first his kingdom, and all these things will be given to you. Do not be afraid, little flock, for your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourselves that will not wear out, a treasure in heaven that will never fail, where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's a lengthy passage, but I've read that one so many times in my life, and I've yet to come to terms with it fully. But Jesus is calling us to a different way of being, a different way of living. One that is not ruled by the anxiety and the stress of will we have enough of these things that we think we need to provide the things we really want. You see, I think sometimes we pursue lesser things by lesser means and we have a lesser life. But he's calling us to more in this passage, to seek first his kingdom. And it gives me context to understand what James is talking about. If we go back to chapter 4, James, who says, today or tomorrow we'll go to this city, spend a year and carry business. and make money. And James is like, you don't know what your life will happen. You don't know what will happen tomorrow. You see, I think in that chapter, James is first of all giving us an ego check. We have these big plans and ambitions and goals. He's like, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. No one saw COVID coming. We had no idea that the entire globe would screech to a halt, that this massive worldwide disruption would occur. And sometimes unexpected things are good and fortuitous and great. And oftentimes they're very tragic, as we know. Just watch the news. There's so many things that happen that, I think, whenever something big, I'm like, what was I doing 1 minute before that? Like, where was I at in a mental space before this thing happened that just changed everything? I remember 9/11, right? It's one of those moments where, I remember exactly what I was doing, eating my breakfast before I turned on the news. And the entire world was changed after that. We don't know. So James is giving us an ego check there. We don't always know what's going to happen. I didn't know I was going to host my brother and his wife and 4 kids last week after our Tahoe trip. He's like, last minute, let's stay at your house. And so we had 6 people. Like, my little niece was sleeping in our closet, and it was great. And it was fun. We don't know what's going to happen in our life sometimes. And I think what happens oftentimes is we begin to pursue, as I was saying, things that are lesser than. As I already said, I think when we pursue lesser things through lesser means, we get lesser results. These people in this story are pursuing wealth to get the significance they think they need. Scriptures calls this idolatry. Whenever we're looking for our security or our significance or our sustenance from something other than the actual source, the ultimate source of God, we've begun to serve a different master. That's why the first of the 10 Commandments, the first 2, have no other gods before me and don't make idols. Because it's so easy for us to wrongly assume, okay, if I get that job or that career, now I will have that significance that I'm creating. Now I'll have that security that I think I need. I love this quote from Thomas Merton. He says, people spend their whole lives climbing the ladder of success, only to find out once they reach the top, the ladder was leaning against the wrong building. I think sometimes we do that. It's not that we don't get what we seek. You obtain the thing you sought, and you realize that is a vapor. It doesn't actually provide the lasting meaning and significance that we are offered through God. And that's why he's saying there's a better way. There's a better way for this. And that's what he's calling us to. What's interesting about that passage where he says, today or tomorrow we'll go make money, and then we don't know what will happen next. That idea of not knowing what will happen next, that can be super scary and anxiety-producing. It's like, thanks, James, for freaking us all out. And same thing with Jesus. It's like in his parable, like, you're going to die tonight. Like, that's a terrifying thought. And I think we all process it in different ways. We all deal with that uncertainty with different strategies and tactics. For some of us, we just begin to live and operate out of fear. We want to avoid any kind of risk. We don't want to have anything that's hurtful or traumatic or experience any kind of loss. When I was young, my father passed away. I was a little kid, and I've only, in the last decade, really been unpacking a lot of those effects on my life. And you can begin to see how experiencing a loss at that age, one that I didn't really fully comprehend, just there was this dad who was there and then he wasn't. This security that I just assumed would always be there, this bedrock, this foundation, who was gone. And so your little kid brain, you begin to think, well, nothing is safe. Nothing is guaranteed. There's nothing that's trustworthy in this world. I need to protect myself. I need to build these walls and barriers. I can't become too attached to anyone or anything, because what if it's gone? If I build my identity and my sense of being upon this person or this thing, that when it disappears, who am I? And so I built these strategies to protect myself. And I think sometimes we do that. We've experienced loss. We've experienced something not happening the way we wanted it to. And our result is to pull away, to retract, to become small, to avoid any kind of hurt or pain. We no longer risk, even though God calls us to risk boldly. Another tactic is like in the story in the parable of Jesus. We're like, screw it. We're all going to die anyways. Let's eat, drink, be merry. Like, woo, like, carpe diem. And I think there is actually something beautiful in that to a sense. Like, there is something really good about living in the moment and savoring all the good things around us. God also calls us to that too. We're supposed to experience beauty and joy. Like, yes, there's so many Psalms and Proverbs that like, enjoy food, enjoy drink. Just don't get milkshakes from gas stations because they will destroy you. But when it's this mindset of there's nothing beyond, there's nothing real in this universe, nothing really matters, we sort of become fatalistic and we say, I'm just going to disengage in a different way because it's self-indulgent, as it says in scriptures. It's all about how can I get as much pleasure for myself as possible before I check out. And I think we lessen the impact we can have on the world around us. And I actually think it puts a ceiling on the joy and meaning that we can experience too. Because we just engage with the quick hits until we're gone. Or what we can do, and we see this all throughout history and scriptures, is people have tried to predict the future. If we can just figure out where all the risks are going to come, if I can just avoid them through my own intellect, through my own ambition, through my own, as it says in the passage there, our arrogant schemes, then I'll come out on top. In the old days, it was seers and prophets and fortune tellers. Nowadays, it's algorithms and big data, companies looking at human behavior online to predict things. But we're all trying to figure out what's going to happen next so that we can maximize it for ourselves. And if you look back into these ancient scriptures, people often sacrificed too much for this safety. James, 2 chapters earlier, says this. You'll hear how it connects in a second. He's talking about faith and works and how they're connected. And James says, was not our father Abraham considered righteous for what he did when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see that his faith and his actions were working together, and his faith was made complete by what he did. And the scriptures was fulfilled and said Abraham trusted God. And God counted him as righteous because of his faith and his trust, and even called him a friend. What's interesting here, what James is talking about is a story I've always found to be pretty uncomfortable, where God invites Abraham to literally sacrifice his son, the one he's been waiting for forever, child sacrifice. It's weird. God commands it. Abraham's ready to do it. Just as he's about to strike him with a knife, God stops him and supplies a ram for the actual sacrifice. And so James here is talking about this act reveals Abraham's trust in God. And that's what we're talking about, and we're continuing to trust. But I think there's a much deeper point. There's a more powerful and profound point that this story tells us. You see, at the time, in the historical context of Abraham, there were all kinds of other cultures and tribes around them. There were the Phoenicians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, the Mesopotamians. They all had a slew of gods. Most famous among them was this god called Moloch. And Moloch would offer you information about your future. If you wanted to know, am I going to have a good harvest? Are my kids going to thrive the next year? Will my business succeed? Will I have what I need to live the life that I want? You'd go to the prophets of Moloch. And Moloch would require you to make sacrifices. And for the deepest knowledge, it'd be the deepest sacrifice. And you would have to burn your child alive to get information from Moloch. And you see what's happening here is Abraham doesn't really know Yahweh yet, the God of Israel. They've only just begun this relationship. God's been calling him out of his place of birth, this town called Ur, and through faith and through trust, Abraham doesn't even really know Yahweh, decides to leave everything that was comfortable, familiar, and to go to this new place. And God promises him this child, and Abraham doesn't really believe it because he's an old man, and then this child comes. And then Yahweh does seemingly what all the other gods are doing, saying, now you owe me something. Sacrifice your son, and I will continue to bless you. The climax of the story is God stopping Abraham and saying, I'm not like the other gods. I don't need you to grovel and to sacrifice to earn my affection, to earn my belonging, to earn my love. I am a trustworthy God who will provide for you, as Jesus says. More than the lilies and the birds and all this, I have your back. It may not always look like what you think you want, but I always have your best intentions, your best future in mind. I am working towards that all the time. Will you trust me? That's the question you see throughout all of Scriptures, and every story, every narrative, every parable. Beneath the surface is God saying, will you trust me? Yeah. And trust looks like taking that step out. But we see here again, the story is revealing that God is the provider, the one who loves us, who is worthy, the only one worthy of our trust. Because again, when we put our significance, our security, our sustenance in lesser things around us, these modern day false gods, these modern day Molechs, we will be left wanting every time. And God's saying, I don't want you to be left wanting. I want you to have life abundant. He's trying to steer us to the source of it. And that is what James is speaking about against these people who have made money and their own version of success their God. And see, when we begin to trust God, what happens is we can develop resiliency to when the world throws us crazy curveballs. I'm learning that I've become more resilient. Not because I have more armor up. That's the weird paradox is as we begin to place our trust in God, He doesn't harden our heart, He softens our heart. But He makes us more agile, more adaptable. It says it in the very first chapter of his book. James says, count it joy when struggles come your way, because it's going to make you stronger. We no longer have to fear what James is talking about in chapter 4. Oh, calamity strikes. The fearful way is to hide from it, to mitigate all the possible risk. Jesus is saying, lean into the risk because I am with you. Let me teach you to be resilient, to have grit, to not become hard in the process, to maintain empathy for those around you. That is the paradoxical supernatural power of what God is calling us to and offering us to. Yeah. He wants us to be adaptable. He wants us to learn to fail and fail faster so that we can rise higher. Not just for ourselves, but so that we can elevate those around us. And he says we do this by seeking first his kingdom. I'm going to close with this. What does that mean? Actually, one more point that I think is important, and then I'll close. What's weird in James 4 is he's saying these strange things about people going to make money. What is your life? It's a vapor. And then people will say, well, what you should say is, if it's God's will, we'll do this or that. And then immediately says, if anyone knows the good they ought to do and don't do it, for them it's a sin. It seems like a weird pivot, like out of nowhere. Talking about money and vapor and then God's will, and then all of a sudden, like, if you know what to do and you don't do it, it's a sin. But if you really think about it, it makes total sense. Because I have experienced, I don't know about you, I've experienced people who have heard that, oh, if it's God's will thing. And it's just a phrase we say. It's like thoughts and prayers. Oh, if it's God's will, we just throw it out there. And then we do what we want. Or we say it and we have no control. We can't do anything. God's will be God's will. We have no agency. We can make no impact in this world. What's going to happen is going to happen. And we have this false philosophy, right? It can look a lot of ways. Everything happens for a reason. And what happens is we become passive and apathetic, and we disengage. We can't make any difference. And we spiritualize it. We make it sound so pious. If it's God's will, it'll happen or it won't. And then we retract, we withdraw, we disengage. And I think that is why James immediately reminds us of what he's saying this entire book. It's all about faith and action. He's like, hey, I said all this stuff about submitting to God's will, but if you know what to do and you don't do it, that's toxic to you. That's what sin is. Sin is something that's toxic. Toxic is corrosive. It's separating. It's not good. And God doesn't want us to live in places that aren't good. So he's saying, when you know what you're supposed to do and you abdicate that power and that responsibility, it's toxic to you and those around you. So don't fall into the lie or the trap that you have no power or no responsibility. At the end of Luke 12, Jesus says, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it pleases God to give you the kingdom." As much as God calls us to trust him, he entrusts us with the kingdom. And so we can't stay in this camp of being afraid of everything, letting the fact that we don't know what happens tomorrow keep us locked in the prisons of fear, nor can we skew to the side of just passive, apathetic, come what may, I can do nothing. He wants us to be in the uncomfortable tension of the middle and saying, lean in, I will call you into dark and scary places. But the promise, the trustworthy promise is I will never leave you or forsake you. I will never leave you or forsake you. There are many of these passages. Here's just a few of them. Just a few of them. The Lord himself goes before you and be with you. He will never leave or forsake you. Do not be afraid or discouraged. Behold, I am with you even to the end of the age. Be anxious for nothing. That's tricky. Anxiety is a complex beast. There's no simple solution there. I won't pretend there is. But be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and petition and with thanksgiving present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses understanding, an irrational peace, will guard your hearts and minds. Trust that he who began a good work in you will carry it to completion, because with God all things are possible. And behold, he is making all things new. So I'll end with this here. How do we seek the kingdom? How do we seek it first? That's a lifelong question that I encourage you to wrestle with, pray about. The first answer is going to be specific to you. I don't know what God's calling you to do that you ought to do. I have no idea. But I believe that at least one person in here, when I read that verse, there's something that comes to mind. That's pursuing the kingdom. Obviously engaging with things like prayer and communion with the Spirit. But here's 3 G's as we close. First one's gratitude. And this is specifically related to this James talking about money and wealth and all this stuff. Gratitude. Gratitude. All throughout Scripture, we're called to express gratitude. Science has proven there are innumerable benefits psychologically, physiologically, that's a weird word to say. Our brains get changed. We rewire our brains with gratitude. It makes us smarter. It makes us more hopeful. It makes us more creative. There's a reason God calls us to give thanks. Generosity. I have discovered in my own life the best antidote for me getting consumed with my own wealth, my own desire to go find significance through job accolades or through money or through homes or through clothes or through whatever. The best antidote is to live a life of generosity, to give away without expecting anything in return, not just invest, but to give. Investing is great, but to give without needing a return because God has already given us. And thirdly, engage with generating beautiful things. I don't know what that means for you. Could be art, could be your family, could be the community you make in your neighborhood, could be the environment you curate at your workplace. Engage in generating beautiful things. Because God's a beautiful God. Seek first the kingdom. And then all these things that you actually really, really want, the things you really need, will be added to you. When you try to cherry pick these things individually, you're never going to be satisfied. Seek the source. Go beyond just the gifts to the giver himself, who invites us into relationship so we can be like Abraham and be a friend of God. Whatever God's Spirit is calling you to do, pray about what it looks like to do that, and then engage with gratitude, generosity, and generating beautiful things. We're about to sing a new song for us It's all about this idea that God is trustworthy. I'm going to read just a few lyrics, and then I'm going to join the band, and we're going to sing it. And I invite you, if you don't mind, let's just stand as we go into this last song here. There's a section in this tune that says, if you said it, God, we believe it. That's not true in my life a lot, I'll be honest. But I want it to be. I want it to be desperately. If you said it, we believe it. Because we have this confidence that you will finish what you started. God, you have never failed, and you won't start with me. You're present in every step. You are patient in every heartache, every disappointment, every plan that was destroyed, everything we wanted so badly that didn't come to fruition. God is with you in it. He grieves with you. He celebrates with you. You're patient in every heartache. God, you've never failed, and you won't.